awareness on and raising awareness on the topic of externalization and return hubs. So this is a webinar hosted by the Border Violence Monitoring Network. We are an alliance of organizations and NGOs working to document, expose, and advocate for the end of border violence and illegal pushbacks across European borders. And today we will be talking about Albania as a site of EU border externalization, as well as return hubs that are being opened in Albania. And we will do so with our speakers. As Colleen was mentioning, we have Hope Barker, who is an independent researcher and has been also researching Albania as a site of externalization and its relationship with the EU. Cristina Milona, who is an investigative journalist based in Tirana and also co-founder of Europe Other, a grassroots collective fighting against border violence in Albania, and Eleonora Celoria, who is a lawyer and member of ASGI, the Association for Juridical Studies in Immigration. So as said, today we will be talking about Albania's relationship with the EU, as well as dive into the Italy-Albania deal, or the Rama-Meloni Deal, that sees the opening of these 2 return hubs in Albania, planning to process up to 36,000 asylum seekers per year. Though the deal already presents loads of criticalities from a legal and human rights point of view, it is a turmoil on a practical level, not to mention the high cost that it has, and its whole implementation has been hectic, to say the least. But nonetheless, this deal has also been endorsed by the EU. In October, actually, President von der Leyen has addressed a letter to the leaders of member states saying that the EU would be able to learn lessons from this deal. And both von der Leyen and Italian Prime Minister Meloni have described the deal as thinking outside the box, even though maybe this box is probably a legal and human rights box. And we will go through this together. So in fact, we will be discussing the real impact of the deal and dive into the role of Albania in EU's obsession to externalize its borders. So we can start with Hope, that we'll go through the history of Albania as a transit country. And Hope has actually also worked in the context of the BVMN in our latest reports on surveillance and technology at European borders that you can also find on BVMN's website. And specifically, the report on Albania has been researched and written by Hope and the legal team of BVMN. So looking forward to hearing your insights. Hope, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jessie, and thanks to BVMN for hosting us today. So I'm going to try and give an intervention that's more context setting, not really going into the specifics of the deal between Italy and Albania, which my colleagues from Italy and Albania will do much better than I could anyway. I'm just going to lay a bit the scene of the dynamics kind of at play in Albania when it comes to migration and asylum. As Jessie said, I was in Albania earlier this year to do research for the BVMN, which was just trying to map the situation in the country, the actors at play, and also border surveillance technologies, particularly at the Greek-Albanian border. That's kind of where my intervention will be coming from. To start, I'm just going to give like a super brief history and try not to be too reductive with it, but just to explain the very unique dynamic of immigration/emigration in Albania as a country. So obviously in 1989, when the Iron Curtain fell, there were a series of protests which led to the 1991 revolutions, which led to the fall of Hoxha's communist regime. And in March 1991 was the first time a massive group of Albanians left to Italy as a result of the borders being more lax after the fall of Hoxha's regime. And that was the first group of 23,000 in March who were accepted into Albania. But in August, another 20,000 tried to follow, and all of them were returned without procedure and without exception. And during the same period, approximately 30,000 people arrived in Greece. Then in 1997, after the collapse of multiple pyramid schemes where lots of people lost their life savings, there was another period of many people leaving from Albania. And all of this kind of has contributed to the fact that in my research, kind of everyone I spoke to referred to themselves and to the country as a migrant nation or a nation of migrants. And this really plays a lot into how Albania then is, like the dynamic in Albania when it comes to migration and asylum. One anecdote that was told to me by a journalist was that in the late 90s, early 2000s, if you would go to the Greek border, you could see like masses of Albanians leaving, and then also people from Syria and Iraq and Iran coming, passing each other on the same route in opposite directions. So this is an anecdote that really shows this kind of immigration-emigration dynamic in Albania. And in some ways, this does translate into the treatment of displaced populations by Albania as a country and as a state. For example, in World War II, they took in many Jews who were fleeing the Nazi regime. Again, lots of Kosovars were taken in the 90s. In 2016, 155 members of the People's Mujahideen of Iran who were being persecuted in Iran were relocated to Albania, where they remain to this day. And when the US withdrew from Afghanistan and the Taliban came to power again, 30,000 Afghans were relocated to Albania in lieu of being relocated later on to the US. Many of them are still there, actually living in Shenzhen in hotels, which is one of the facilities for the Italy-Albania deal is. So that's also another thing to consider. So a lot of this is explained by people kind of saying, you know, we're a nation of migrants, we're a migrant nation, and this is our humanitarian duty. And this is also the line that Edi Rama, Albania's prime minister, has also tried to sow to the press. This kind of like, it's our humanitarian duty and it's what we need to do as Albania. But on the other hand, lots of people say, and there's evidence that basically, you know, what he says is different to the reality, that actually it's about trying to curry favor with powerful international leaders and doing corrupt deals that benefit him and his government. And this obviously feeds into the Italy-Albania deal as well, where it's kind of been billed as this like humanitarian responsibility to do with Italy and Albania's special relationship, but actually was a deal done behind closed doors, where, you know, we are aware that lots of money and agreements have changed hands that are still murky and not fully understood. So I think that's one thing we really need to bear in mind when we're looking into this agreement and discussing it more today. Another dynamic at play is the nature of Albania in its relationship to the EU. Albania is part of an enclave of states that are surrounded by EU member states, and is all of them, with the exception of Kosovo, are on track for EU accession. And they're all commonly referred to as transit countries along the so-called Balkan route. And this leads to what's been termed by multiple researchers as a sort of accession blackmail, which is common to non-EU states along the so-called Balkan route, where the EU basically says, you know, do our dirty work on your borders, stop the people from reaching us, and eventually we'll let you into the bloc and we'll let you be members. And this has been ongoing for a lot of the countries, Serbia, Bosnia, Albania, North Macedonia, for many years. And what the EU does is, through the instrument for pre-accession assistance, gives funds to Albania to fortify their borders, to increase their patrols, their vehicles, their vessels, and also buy border surveillance equipment as a way to fortify the border and stop people from crossing further into the EU. One interesting thing to note is one of the main projects that we researched and that is in the report is a big project where the EU gave a lot of money for surveillance technologies on the Greek border, but also on the coastal border with Italy. And the main actor that was part of implementing the project and procuring the equipment was the Austrian think tank ICMPD, which has also had a lot of backlash in the context of Bosnia for similarly being involved in these kind of deals that are violating people's fundamental rights at borders in these non-EU states. So yeah, that's kind of Albania as a country within the context of the EU in terms of transit in Albania or for people crossing borders. So it forms a key part of the route in terms of people crossing from Turkey into Greece are often leaving through either North Macedonia or Albania. Previously, I was in Thessaloniki for 5 years, so was able to see how the route really shifts depending on weather, on different factors that aren't always easy to map as well. So people are kind of transiting either into North Macedonia or Albania. When people transit into Albania, they either try to continue on upwards through Montenegro or Kosovo, or previously there was a trend of people trying to transit from Durrës, a port town just west of Tirana, clandestinely on boats to Italy. As such, it being on the so-called Balkan route and a part of the EU's Border Fortress Europe campaign, there have been pushbacks monitored at these borders by the BVMN and other actors. At the Greek border, this is quite common. So in the villages of Beylisht and Girokasta, people are often apprehended and then pushed back directly into Greece. It is worth saying that of the testimonies in the BVMN database, Albania's tend to be less coupled with extreme violence. Of course, this doesn't mean that a pushback isn't illegal in and of itself, but they haven't been massively violent. However, there are some exceptions to that rule. For example, there's a number of Frontex serious incident reports which detail undressings and beatings of people prior to being returned to Greece. There were also several incidents in the beginning of January 21 where people were staying in a hostel in Durrës before trying to cross. And there were at least 2 or 3 occasions where there were mass raids where people were subject to violence, then taken back to the Greek border and pushed back. So much like the other borders, Albania has its role to play in violent fortification of the Fortress Europe agenda. It's important to say, I would say, that Albania says it doesn't push people back, and this is explained a bit more in the report. But under Article 102 of the Law on Aliens, there's a specific provision for people on the move who are irregularly entering Albania with the purpose of crossing to other countries. So using Albania as a transit country, and it says they can then be directly deported back to Greece. However, this is without due process and it's not recognized. And of course, as Albania is not an EU member state, it's not held to the same standards when it comes to the asylum acquis. But as we have documented for several years now, and as I also saw when I was there, this practice of inadequate asylum procedures, improper housing and reception capacities for asylum, lack of integration measures if people are granted status, which is very, very rare, and pushbacks at the borders is the same in Albania as it is in other countries. So I think this kind of context is important when we consider where Italy is sending people to when it comes to the return hubs. So with that, I'll pass it on. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you, Hope, very much. I think this is all much clearer for everyone, and we have a clear context in which to place the Italy-Albania deal. So I'll pass it to Christina, who will dive more into the details of these return hubs and the first transfers of people in Albania. So please, Christina, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Jessie. Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. I will quickly start sharing the presentation. Let me know if you're able to see it. Okay.
Yes, we're able to see it.
Great. Thanks for the thumbs up. Firstly, let me thank you for inviting me to talk about the Italy-Albania deal. And in today's presentation, I will share some of the findings from my work as freelance investigative reporter, but also as a member of Europe Other collective, which is a grassroots group in Albania that has been actively following the developments around this agreement since it was announced, and also has been monitoring closely both operations, disembarkation that took place under this deal. So, as some of you may know, around 1 year ago, the Italian and Albanian Prime Minister introduced the signing of this deal to establish 2 centers in Albania, referring to a hotspot in the Shëngjin port and detention centers in a former military area next to Jadar village. The deal stipulated that third country nationals, specifically men coming from so-called safe countries, and also those classified as non-vulnerable after the pre-screening that takes place in the sea, if intercepted at international waters by Italian Coast Guard, Custom Police, and the Navy, would be taken and disembarked to Albania for an extraterritorial processing of their asylum claims and for their eventual expulsion. Also, like the protocol constitutes like a bilateral deal formally and a ad hoc policy arrangement. As Hope also mentioned in her presentation, the deal was negotiated with closed doors, and it was agreed away like from the public eye with no public consultation. For instance, in the Albanian context, not even the Albanian president had granted priorly power of authority for this deal, given that the Albanian constitution, like by the constitution, the president should grant his authorization that is needed for agreements that touch on the territorial sovereignty of the state. And initially, these centers were slated to open in the spring. At least that's what the Italian Prime Minister kept saying. But at the end, they were made operational only on the 11th of October, as it was announced by the Italian ambassador to Albania, Mr. Fabrizio Bucci. So in this site are some pictures clicked during April, which was the time when approximately the construction had just commenced. On the left side is a picture of the Shenzhen port, within which the hotspot is built in. And it's an area covering around 4,000 square meters and surrounded by a 5-meter high barbed metal fence. And this is basically the site where the identification and the screening procedure take place. And on the right side is a picture from the area of Jadar, where nowadays, of course, we can't see anymore this freely because it's fenced off by a 6-meter wall. And overall, it is composed of 2 main parts, which include a reception center sized for 880 migrants, also a center of permanence for repatriation, or differently referred by the abbreviation of CPR, and this has a total capacity of 144 migrants. But also there are some structures like around 168 places for service accommodation, 60 of which are served for the staff of the managing institution, and the remaining should have been used by the staff of the other institution operating within the center. And here, interestingly enough, when I was there doing field trips, I remember a security guard that shared with me anonymously that actually the construction in the Jadar area for the CPR started with a bit of delay because the Albanian military had not granted permission to Italian authorities. So that was one of the reasons of the delay, according to this security guard. At the end, after 8 months of ongoing construction, the centers in Jadar look like this now. So these are some of the pictures that me and other members from Europe Other clicked, and this is like the entrance of Jadar centers from different angles. The buildings at the entrance here, the ones that are visible, belong to the administration, and the pictures on the bottom are taken from a hillside, because this area where the centers are built, they lie next to this small hill, and actually many journalists use the hill as a vantage point to take pictures during the coverage of the first disembarkation. But when the second operation took place, which was in November, the Albanian policemen did not allow any longer journalists to go up the hill and do the reporting, because according to their reasoning, this is like a military base, and taking pictures from this distance is not allowed. So as you can see from the pictures in this site, work in Jadar is not fully finalized. And I actually spoke with some MEPs from Volt Europe that recently came to do an inspection visit in the centers, and they confirmed that the construction is still going on, even though the deal has faced stumbling blocks by the Rome court and is currently emptied, with only a few Italian staff workers staying there to look after the structures. If I'm not mistaken, there are only 7 personnel currently in. Here are some pictures of the Italian naval ship that was in charge for the transfer of the migrants to Albania, called Libra. So since the center's opening on the 11th of October, in total only 24 migrants have been deported to the centers in Albania, with the goal of repatriating them to their countries of origin. And out of which only like 5 of them spent fewer than 12 hours in Albania due to being declared unfit for stay, because they were identified as minors, and some of them vulnerable. While the rest of the migrants from the group stayed for just over 48 hours. And in both operations, the Rome court did not validate the detention of the migrants in the prison camps in Jadar. Here in these sites, I have inserted some snapshots from the first operation that took place in October. Here are pictures of the entrance of the Shenzhen port. And this is the moment where 12 migrants were transferred from the Shenzhen port to Jadar after almost 13 hours of undergoing screening and identification procedures in the hotspot structure. As you can see from the pictures, the transfer was done with a strong presence of Italian Carabinieri cars, Albanian policemen, and I think 3 other cars that were following the van that transported the migrants to Jadar. Here, I've also thought to maybe give you some general thoughts, opinions of more like ethnographic reflections from my conversation with the inhabitants in Jadar. Actually, some of them live quite in proximity to these centers. And they were telling me how they feel in general about these centers, like what are their emotions whenever they pass by these centers. And some were telling me that they feel disturbed, that Albania has become a complicit country to the migrant suffering, because also we should bear in mind that Albanians themselves are also subjected to Frontex deportation. They comprise one of the highest population in immigration detention across Europe. So therefore, these centers, of course, produce these effects of re-traumatization for some of the inhabitants there. And in addition to what Hope said about the rhetoric and narrative used by the Albanian Prime Minister to kind of legitimize and justify this deal, another, let's say, controversial narrative that he used was when he said that this agreement should be struck with Italy because Albanians have a historical debt and a moral obligation to the Italian government for welcoming thousands of refugees who escaped in the 90s after the political turmoil, the civil war, and the breakdown of law that followed Albania after the fall of communism. However, this narrative used by the Prime Minister in Albania overlooks the xenophobic, the racist language and treatment in the 90s that Albanians faced by Italian politicians who demonized and treated securitized Albanian refugees as criminals. And how some of the Albanian refugees that went to Italy, they were basically like the Guinea pigs for the boat pushbacks and the blockade that Italy imposed on them. And now 30 years later, Albania is giving its own territory to reproduce this violence to other racialized people. And of course, this translates into a feeling of humiliation and pretty disturbing for some of the inhabitants that I met with in Jadar. And cherry on top regarding the companies profiting out of this deal. So from my investigation published in some Italian media, which focus on the companies that profited from this deal, I actually discovered that while MediHospice Cooperative was announced as the Italian company that was awarded with a tender for managing the Italian migrant centers in accordance to this protocol, by my investigation, I found out that based on some documents at the National Business Center in Albania, they revealed that this Italian company has actually established a branch office named MediHospice Albania. And as outlined in its Establishment Act, the excerpt of which I've also inserted in this presentation, it is actually this company that will be managing all the services related to the operation and to the management of the migrant centers under the Meloni-Rama Deal. So hence MediHospice Albania is the one benefiting from the services provided by the Italian centers in Albania. They were legally registered on July the 2nd, according to the documents, and it was established as a company by Mr. Camillo Giuseppe Azzetto, who is also the administrator of MediHospice Cooperative in Italy, and I guess to no one's surprise, it has, as a company, a track record of mismanagement and abuse of funds. Other interesting facts that I found from this investigation on the company is that, it has its headquarters in Tirana. It will operate its commercial activity in Albania for over 30 years. And in addition to the services for the migrant centers, it will also pretty much offer other similar services that it offers in Italy. In total, I think it's around 50 in the list. And also, MediHospice Albania will be allowed to participate in tenders and in public procurements announced by public or private entities in Albania to provide services. And it will also be eligible to request and apply for the European Union subsidies. Last but not least, I'm happy to share with you the establishment of the Network Against Immigration Detention, which is made up of collectives from based in Albania and Italy. This network and its initiation was the result of a series of online meetings and some in-person meetings that activists, comrades from both countries had throughout the last months. Very soon, we will have a massive mobilization planned for the 1st and 2nd of December here in Albania. We will go to protest in front of the centers, but also in Tirana, to say no to detention centers wherever in Europe, and also, yeah, those offshore elsewhere. So yeah, this was it, like a summary of some of the most interesting findings that I had, and of course I can elaborate more in the Q&A session. But before I end, I would like to quickly thank Safe Passage Fund on behalf of other members from Europe Other for supporting us financially to do the monitoring work around this deal. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Cristina. Thank you also for sharing the action you're doing. So if anyone can actually participate, that would be great. And thank you also for raising the question of private outsourcing that most of the time remains kind of invisibilized, whereas we should also keep an eye on that. So we can move on with Eleonora, and that will give us the Italian perspective on this deal, and tell us how this is also like a problematic form of externalization and what is going on so far, and also the criticalities from a human rights perspective. Thank you, Eleonora.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jessie. Thank you to the BVMN for organizing this, this moment and for the invitation. And thank you so much to Cristina for setting the scene so clearly and so precisely. So I would say that from an Italian juridical perspective, this agreement between Italy and Albania represents a new tool, so a sort of experiment, but it's part of a long-lasting approach to asylum and migration policies, which are based on exclusion, on the limitation of rights, and of course, on externalization. And this tool is very much based on images and symbolism, but at the same time, it is a very controversial legal grounds. And I will try to assess why. So as we listen already, the core of the deal is the cooperation between Italy and Albania, and it's based on the fact that Albania agrees to admit migrants on its territory and to allow Italy and Italian authorities to carry out asylum border procedures and return procedures. And both are regulated by Italian and European law. And the jurisdiction exercised in the areas, the port and Shenzhen and Jader, sorry for the pronunciation, and on the detention centers is the Italian one. The centers are under the control of Italian authorities, and as we've seen, they are managed by this private cooperative Mediospes, appointed by Italian authorities. So, in this sense, the agreement can be considered as a new form of externalization because it's based on a cooperation with a third country and on a policy of non-arrival to the territory, to the Italian territory. But at the same time, it maintains the Italian responsibility and it uses Italian accelerated border procedure, asylum border procedures, which are fast and standardized way of examining an asylum application based in Italy on the concept of safe country of origin. So on the presumption that the countries that migrants are from are safe countries. And so the asylum application can be processed in a very fast and superficial way. And so seen from this perspective, the deal basically creates not just a new model of externalization, but also a model of border shifting, because we need to take into account that all the procedures implemented by Italy are border procedures, and they are de facto based on a fiction of non-entry. So the ideas underlying, I think the underlying concept and the idea of the Italian government is that if migrants are place under border procedures and they cannot enter the Italian territory, those border procedures can take place everywhere else, including in Albania, so also in third state. And this is very dangerous because to establish this concept, to establish the possibility that border procedures under a fiction of non-entry can be carried out everywhere, it's very problematic. And we can also see as an Italian way of anticipating the new pact. And I will come back to this at the end of the of this speech. At the same time, I also want to stress that so far the agreement entailed that after the asylum processing, migrants can be placed in pre-deportation centers in Albania, but if they are recognized as refugees or beneficiaries of protection, they have to be brought back to Italy. But we think that even in the case they are not recognized as beneficiaries, so they are to be returned, the return cannot take place from the Albanian soil, so from Albanian airports. That means that even returnees, migrants to be deported, will be taken back to Italy. And so this is also gives us the idea of how this policy is a symbolic policy, very harmful on people, but a symbolic policy. As for the way it has worked in practice so far, well, we know that this entire operation is expected to cost over 800 million euros. And in these 2 months, we have seen, as Christine anticipated, 24 migrants brought back and forth from the Mediterranean Sea because they were stopped in international water but close to Lampedusa, brought to Albania and then brought back to Italy. And the migrants have been detained, we have seen that from the pictures, have been constantly posed under the control of the police, so in a very militarized way, as if they were criminals, even though all these people were traveling from Libya and they have suffered violence and they have suffered torture in Libya. We have seen that they were brought to Albania after a screening on Libra, on the Italian Coast Guard ship, and the screening was conducted by Italian authorities and with the support of the International Organization for Migration. And this is also very problematic concerning the complicity of international organizations with this deal. But at the same time, so far, both groups of migrants that were taken to Albania were then released. So the first group of 12 migrants was released after 2 days they spent in Albania because the Italian judges, called upon deciding on their detention, ruled that it was not possible to apply an accelerated border procedure because their country of origin, Egypt and Bangladesh in that case, they could not be considered entirely safe. And this decision was based on the interpretation of the concept of third safe country given by the Court of Justice of the EU. And so this is why you probably heard many comments on the role of judges and the compliance with EU law concerning the deal. Then a few weeks later, in early November, 8 migrants were once again intercepted close to Lampedusa, transferred to Albania after the screening. And after the government strongly criticized and attacked the judiciary following the initial decisions, and then the government issued a new decree law once again on the concept of safe country of origin, the judges competent to decide on the situation of migrants in Albania decided to suspend the asylum border procedures, to send a request to the Court of Justice of the European Union to interpret once again this concept, because the entire border procedure is based on this concept. And because of the suspension of the border procedures, the migrants were released and they were able to enter Italy, actually. And because of this, the entire operation, the Italy-Albania operation, has been suspended so far. Now, the latest attempt of the government is to assign the decision of migrant detention to new judges. So to change the competence upon deciding on detention from specialized judges, such as the one who ruled in October and in November, and to give this competence to not very specialized judges. So to the Court of Appeal, in which judges, they know less about both migration, asylum, and detention. An approach that does not appear to be fully democratic and in line with the principle of division of powers from our perspective. But what I want to stress, and this is, I just want to explain, to clarify the reasons why right now this entire operation is still suspended, and as we heard, there is no one in the centers in Albania anymore. But I also want to stress that regardless of the interpretation of the safe country of origin concept and the way the accelerated border procedure are carried out, there is a bigger, the issue is much more wider, because it is the entire externalization that raises questions of the compatibility of the system with Italian and EU law, Italian legal order, and especially with the respect for fundamental rights. And this is because the government assumption, as we said already, is that migrants are treated in Albania as if they are on Italian soil, as if they are in Italy. And therefore, based on this assumption, their rights will be respected. This is what the Italian government says. But this is very problematic for at least two reasons. First of all, even on Italian territory, the use of detention affect migrant rights to personal liberty, and the accelerated procedures affect migrant rights to asylum. Even in Italy, we believe that a generalized detention is not an acceptable tool to govern migration, both because it is harmful and because it is no more like a measure of last resort. And similarly, also, when we look at asylum procedures in Italy, we claim that they should be examined on individual grounds without basing the decision on migrants' nationality or the country of origin or transit. On top of that, and I will go to the conclusion, but we also noticed in these first 2 months that the fact that migrants are not physically in Italy and the fact they are detained makes it impossible to ensure procedural guarantees and the right to defense. So we have seen that the vulnerability assessments are flawed, that migrants' phones are confiscated, that they cannot meet with the lawyers. They don't even know, they didn't even understand who the lawyer was. They cannot speak with them. And so they cannot exercise the right to be heard or to counseling. And most importantly, there is a clear discrimination. So migrants brought to Albania are discriminated against and compared to migrants in Italy. And there is no justification, legal and grounded justification for this. So to sum up, the deal is a puzzle, a compilation of some of the worst practices we have so far witnessed in the field of migration and asylum management, because it is based on this policy of non-arrival on the territory, because migrants are excluded from access to basic rights, they are detained, and the fact that the asylum application is accelerated increases the risk of deportation in violation of the principle of non-refoulement. And finally, talking about deportation, it is important to stress that we knew from the beginning that there were very few chances that migrants would have been returned to their country of origin. So it's not real that Albania will become a return hub, both because it's very unlikely that migrants can be returned. For instance, we have seen that there are, in the last 5 years, there were no returns to Bangladesh, of migrants to Bangladesh. So those returns were impossible. And at the same time, migrants cannot be deported by Italy directed from Albania. So they should be returned back to Italy, and eventually then the deportation could take place. But as I said, we have seen no deportation of asylum seekers to those countries. And so I just want to say that what we have seen so far is a policy that is both inhuman and ineffective, but it somehow anticipates the implementation of the new pact. It shares many common elements with the pact, like the generalized use of detention, the fast-track border procedures, the use of fictions to change the reality and to limit the access to fundamental rights. And in this sense, the deal can be also seen as a preview of both the violation but also the flaws of migration policies, and the very violation that we will have to challenge in the near future with the implementation of the pact. And I will stop now, but I'm happy to answer in the Q&A session to all your questions.
Thank you so much, Eleonora. This was clarifying a lot of confusing practices that we have seen with this deal. I really like the puzzle of the worst practices that we have had so far, because it really looks like this. Okay, so we have 15 minutes, or even a couple of more actually, to answer some questions. We have a lot already. I'll just read. I'll start with one from the Q&A section, and then I see that Celine has her hand raised. So next I will give the word to her. The first question is directed to Cristina, and the question is, could you give us a bit more of info on the screening process? Does it take place at sea or in the Shenzhen facilities? And do you know who conducts it and how long it lasts?
Okay, thank you for your question. From what I followed so far, and also from the interviews that I had with inspection team that went inside the centers, these teams were comprised of European deputies that had the chance to talk with the personnel and get like an overview what happens at this stage. Actually, there is a lack of information on the procedures on the pre-screening that takes place in the sea. Before the selective disembarkation, where intercepted migrants are divided and the ones that get selected to get transferred to Albania. So for this, we as journalists and in general, reporting on this hasn't been easy because there isn't much information on this stage. Also because when Libra, the ship, came to Albania, they left the Shenzhen port within 2 hours after they got disembarked. So this way, whatever inspection team that got in order to get information for this pre-screening procedure at sea, they are not present there because they go back. And Libra basically just stopped near the Albanian sea to wait for any potential transfer of migrants that would be deemed unfit, like vulnerable or minors, and would be returned back to Italy. So this is the thing, that for the pre-screening, we don't have much information, but for sure we can say, as Eleanor stressed out, that it has had a lot of ambiguities and pretty flawed, because it failed to understand that majority of the migrants had passed through the Libyan checkpoints, and this is already substantiated evidence of the torture that the migrants have gone through. As for the procedures in Shenzhen, I don't have much information, but from the medical aspect, I've spoken with some doctors and they said that no matter how much the Italian and Albanian Prime Minister promote it as a deal that has produced structures that have everything, very comprehensive services, actually it misses some important medical examination even in Shenzhen spot. Like they don't have in place the necessary comprehensive services for a thorough medical examination of the migrants in the hotspot.
Thank you, Cristina. Also, I just wanted to flag, as maybe people will start to leave that, and also for the others that will leave at the end, that when you leave a poll will pop up with 2 questions, and we will be very happy if you could answer them, just to flag this. And now I see that Celine has her hand raised, so if you want to ask your question, go ahead. Maybe you can, I think you can open your mic so you can ask the question. Okay, just in case, if you can't, you can also write it either in the chat or in the Q&A section. So if you want to ask this, you can use the other channels that we have. As Celine writes her question, we can go on with another one, which is regarding the legal terms of international law violation of border shifting. What are the similarities with UK's attempt in Rwanda and the Rama-Meloni Agreement? Bearing this in mind, can Italian humanitarian and international organizations sue Italy or fight the unconstitutionality of the Rama-Meloni Agreement at an international or European level? And this is a question to all panelists, if anyone wants to take this over.
I can answer very quickly, and then Christina, if you want to add something, please go ahead. So there are some differences. One of the main differences is that here under the UK Rwanda, the offshoring asylum processing is made by Rwanda. And so people are just deported back to Rwanda. Whereas here, everything is under the responsibility and jurisdiction of Italian authorities. So Italy treats Albania as this border area, but everything is carried out under Italian jurisdiction. As for the possibility to challenge the compatibility with fundamental rights, yes, it's possible. It's very difficult from mine and our perspective as ASGI to challenge the entire deal, but we will have to challenge the violation of fundamental rights in practice. At the same time, I'll be very quick because I don't want to go into details, but at the same time, there is an article of the Italian constitution according to which refugees have the right to access asylum on the territory of Italian Republic. And so this might be a way to challenge the entire deal based on the fact that people cannot have access to the territory. I'm not sure whether or not this will be done. And then there are some controversial issues linked to the applicability of EU law. But even if, because at the beginning, we heard that the European Commission said this agreement is very interesting, we will follow this closely, but at the same time, EU law does not apply directly. So this is not clear whether or not the entire deal is under the scope of EU law, but we believe that there are connections, and anyhow, there will be, that we have seen already, violations of the fundamental rights. To the right to liberty, the right to asylum, the right to defense, and we can challenge those violations both in front of Italian and potentially even in front of European authorities. And they think about the European, well, both the ACTHR and also the Court of Justice of the European Union, depending on the grounds. Sorry for the complexity.
Maybe I can quickly add just something. I mean, Eleanor already summarized it very eloquently, the legal aspect, but just for some contextual basis, I remember that back in November 2021, actually, Albania was the country that was approached by the British government to strike the deal that the British government did it later with Rwanda. So yeah, this is also interesting to see and contextualize it, how, you know, Albania has been pretty much on the agenda for many countries to strike these type of deals.
Thank you to both of you. We have actually a lot of questions, so we can go on, and this is actually cool. So the next one is, I wonder how this worked in practice in the two trials. So I think it's mostly directed to Eleonora with the ruling of the judges in Italy. How did the asylum seekers came into contact with lawyers? Are they assigned lawyers when they are detained, or can they choose? What about lawyers for the asylum procedure, and how quickly were their asylum application examined in Albania?
Very quickly. It took basically 1 day to examine to listen to the stories of asylum seekers and to take a negative decision on the asylum application. So it was very, very quick. As for the legal assistance, so in theory, Mediospes, so the private cooperative, should offer legal counseling. But we know that even in Italy, this is very problematic, and the quality of that legal counseling is very poor. At the same time, during the hearings in front of the judges to decide upon the detention of asylum seekers, migrants are appointed a ex officio lawyer. So they are appointed a lawyer that they don't know. And what is very difficult is that even if migrants want to appoint a new lawyer, there is no a practical way to do it. Well, this is what we have seen so far. It's very difficult for lawyers, even appointed lawyer, to be in contact with migrants. And also because everything happens very quickly. So basically, the right to legal assistance is denied. Maybe there was another questions on this aspect, but I think I have replied more or less.
Yeah, I think you took two questions in one answer. And the next one is, do you already know in the future Italy will try to push for it to be possible to return people directly from Albania?
Well, also, Christina, then you might jump in, but maybe they could have this in mind, but it's actually very difficult. I think from a practical point of view, it will be super complicated. And also, I'm not sure whether or not this is not part of the deal. So in the deal, in the agreement, Albania never agreed to have returns from its airport, basically. And so I think it's quite challenging. That might be the idea, but I also want to stress that returns are not implemented even from Italy. So we have very few returns, and people remain in detention centers for months, several months, now up to 18 months, without being returned. So they will try probably, but I don't see this as an effective policy.
If I may also add up to this, yes, Eleanor said, I mean, this deal has already faced so many stumbling blocks. So even if they had this idea, maybe they should put it at a halt for the moment. But another interesting fact that I noticed in Albania is that the Albanian government in the recent months has submitted a request to strike readmission agreement with 10 third countries of origin. I don't know if this is necessarily related, linked to the deal, but it's still, interesting to keep an eye on this and see if the Albanian government will manage to strike the deal at the end with these countries. And in the list of these countries are India, Pakistan, Tunisia, Afghanistan as well, and some other countries that, I can't recall now.
I would also just add quickly on that it doesn't necessarily relate to the Italy-Albania side of things, but obviously as Albania is not an EU member state, they can make deals with countries that member states can't for returns. So similarly, this year, Serbia was pushing for an agreement with Afghanistan for returns. And the EU has explicitly said that they can't rule out returns to countries that have returns to other countries that they don't return to. So for example, you could be returned to Serbia, to Albania because you transited through and that was a safe third country for you to have asked for asylum in. And then because they aren't bound by the same laws, they could make return agreements with countries that the EU can't consider as safe, which basically ends in refoulement with a stopover in some of these Balkan states. So whilst it's not to do with the Italy-Albania deal, I think it's important to consider with what you've said about the new agreements on returns that Albania is pushing for, which has obviously got some EU force behind it.
Thank you all for all of this insight. I just wanted also to flag, as in 3 minutes we're supposed to wrap up and we have a lot of questions. I will be sharing the Border Violence Monitoring Network email. So if your question has not been answered, you can reach out directly to the Border Violence Monitoring Network. And in turn, I will reach out to our speakers so everyone can get their answer. And thank you so much for being so interested. So I'll just share the email and we can get one last question I got, and that I guess, and then close this. Okay, Leonora, there's a lot of questions for you. So the next one is, does the decision of the ECJ on the safe country concept, including the pending clarification how to interpret it, have an impact on the Italy-Albania model itself, or more broadly clarify the use of the concept in general? The way I understand it is that this decision would not really challenge the Albanian model in itself, but clarify the use of safe country concept wherever it is used. But I would be grateful if you can clarify this. I think this is really useful for the new pact as well. So.
Yes, no, it's exactly like you said, Eva. So the court has been asked to clarify the concept in general. We use that concept both in accelerated procedures in Italy, in border procedures in Italy, and they also used it in Albania. But many different judges asked to the court to clarify the concept in general. And so, yes, it will not have an impact on the deal itself. So the way judges found to stop this deal now is by using this concept, but so far none of Italian courts said that the deal is unlawful or against the constitution. They just use this concept to stop this. I want to stress that until June 2026, the law we have to apply are the directives. So the current laws, we will apply them until June 2026. And so based on those laws, they cannot use this accelerated border procedure the way the Italian government has suggested and tried to do so far. This might change with the new pact, starting from 2026. Also because with the new pact, they will not probably use the concept of safe country of origin, but they will use a different concept, which allow to have border procedure when people come from countries in which the percentage of recognition is less than 20%. So this new concept basically, in a way, overrule the concept of safe country of origin. But so far, so at least for now, and this is why I think, also in order to answer to another question, I think that for now, the deal, the functioning of the deal will be stopped, will be suspended. And also in general, the use of border procedure is kind of suspended because we have to apply this legislation and this concept of safe country of origin upon which the court has to decide. So at least for now, this is the situation. Yes, also in the mainland, procedure can be suspended on the same grounds, as I said. I'm just going through the questions. Maybe I stop because there are also questions from.
I think we can just take the last one, and then, as said, just reach out at the advocacy at borderviolence.eu if you want to have an answer if we haven't answered here. But there's this one on how is the public opinion in Albania regarding the fact that Italy has a jurisdiction in these detention camps. So if anyone wants to take this over.
I guess this is a question that I can answer. From what I followed, it has been pretty mixed. There have been, of course, some protests that were organized when this deal was announced, because, of course, it was a big surprise for everyone. And a deal with such scale and impact, of course, it shouldn't have been drafted and developed with closed doors. So, of course, it instigated some revolt, and there were some local protests organized near these areas. But we should also bear in mind that there is a lot of growing political hostility in Albania. For instance, to exemplify, one of the girls that started the protest in Lezhë, she faced some intimidation, which basically was linked to this engagement with organizing and mobilizing people against this protest. There was also a report done by Albanian Helsinki Committee in collaboration with other actors from civil society and also with some other members from the opposition parties in Albania that strongly they were against this agreement, and they argued that this is done not in compliance with the Albanian constitution, and it's inhuman and potentiates grave human rights violations for the people that will be subjected to it. But when this was filed and reported to the Constitution Court in Albania, at the end it took the green light, and I think that it speaks volumes also about the political context here in Albania and the weak legal institutions that we have, unfortunately. So still, even though the centers are emptied now, we will go on with the mobilization, and I think it's a very milestone moment what is going to happen on the 1st and 2nd of December with this huge mobilization of more than 100 activists, not only from Italy, but also from other countries. And yeah, I hope that it will grow and it will get wider, because who knows, maybe after some months they will come up with another agreement, and we need to be vigilant and strongly organized, more than we were for this agreement. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. Anyone else wants to add on this? Okay, so I think we can end. And again, please reach out if you want to ask more questions, and we can also stay in touch. Thank you very much for everyone who joined and watched this webinar. And thank you very much to our speakers for your presentation. They were extremely useful and interesting. And just to flag again, when you leave, Paul will pop up with some questions. Please answer them. And yeah, I can say that we can say goodbye. And thank you again so much to everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks.